Hello and welcome everyone to our next edition of MTI Live. In this one, we're going to be talking about the Class 2 Conundrum, so 510K versus de novo decoded. And so many of you know that choosing the right regulatory pathway can really make or break a medtech startup's future. So we're really excited to be joined today with four experts whose backgrounds span the FDA, regulatory consulting, and also startups that have navigated these pivotal decisions in both directions. And so, really from deciding when a device is novel enough for de novo to demystifying these common misconceptions about the 510K pathway to really understanding how the FDA and engagements with them shape your outcomes, this session is going to decode those risks, rewards, and strategies behind both of these pathways for you. Additionally, we're going to also compare the Class 2 de novo pathway to the Class 3 PMA pathway for those of you heading down that, especially from our cohort, and know how these compare and contrast when you're creating a competitive barrier for your product. So I'm really looking forward to hearing these accomplished panelists' perspectives on balancing speed, simplicity, and market access on startups' path to impact. So let's first jump in with some introductions. Firstly, really proud to be joined by Susan Alpert, who is a principal at SFA Consulting, former Medtronic SVP and former FDA. So Susan, would love to hear a few minutes of your background.
Sure. First of all, welcome everybody. Important issue for many of us submitting to FDA. By background, I'm actually a pediatric infectious disease specialist. Spent part of my career at FDA, worked on the drug side, so I know a lot about combinations as well. And then led the pre-market side of medical devices at CDRH in the 90s. And that's when de novo was created. So we can talk a little bit about from the beginning. And then I worked in the industry, CR Bard and Medtronic, as a senior global regulator. So I've seen a lot of different types of products go through. So feel free to ask about that as well. And now I consult. Went from the biggest company, Medtronic, to little tiny startups. And again, the pathways and the way they're chosen and the impact FDA has because they get the final say is something that we will talk about. Again, pleased that all of you are joining and happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Susan. Really excited to have you on this, especially given your role in creating the de novo pathway. So it'll be awesome to hear your perspective on that. Next up, we've got Carmen Brown, who's a Senior Regulatory Affairs Manager at Proxima CRO. Proxima is one of our fabulous partners here at MedTech Innovator, helps mentor our companies and helps us even decide who gets into the program. So really an expert in the MedTech space. So welcome, Carmen.
Thanks, Nicole. Happy to be here. Love working with MTI. So like Nicole said, I'm a Senior Regulatory Affairs Manager at Proxima CRO. A little bit about me. I have a background in chemistry and a master's in public health. I too started on the drug side, spent a number of years in the pharmaceutical industry, and now do a little bit of both med device and pharma products. Proxima itself helps startups like yourself execute the regulatory and quality strategy as well as their clinical studies. So happy to answer any questions related to any of those things.
Great. Thanks so much, Carmen. And Carmen is a superstar when it comes to clinical trial design. And so if you guys have questions around that specifically at the end, I'm sure she'd love to speak to that. Next up, we've got two amazing MTI alumni that have been through our program actually and have successful products now on the market. So first, Arazu Azar, who is the VP of Compliance and Program Management at CardioSense. They were part of our 2020 class of MedTech Innovator, and they just got 510K clearance for their device. So congratulations and welcome, Azi.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for that. Thanks for the congratulations. Yes, I go with Ozzy. People Arzu or Ozzy. About my background, I have an engineering background, computer science, electrical engineering, and biomedical engineering, and my PhD was focused on machine learning, AI/ML products. I've been involved with many digital health wearable sensor companies from in past, from AliveCore to Verily, Apple, and AI/ML products, companies are products like Cardiologs and currently CardioSense. Yes, we received our first 510K for a wearable that's in cardiology, and we are very excited to do our de novo very quickly. And about my background, I've been leading compliance, regulatory quality, and clinical programs, and as well as program management in different companies in this space, and I live in Bay Area.
Thank you so much, Ozzy. Super excited to have you on. And last but not least, we've got Cody from DermaSensor. So they were part of our 2022 MedTech Innovator cohort. In their DermaSensor product got de novo approval. So really excited to have them on. Welcome, Cody.
Thank you, and excited to speak with everyone today. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Cody Simmons. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DermaSensor. Backgrounds in bioengineering, entrepreneurship, and economics. At Brown, and did graduate research at Stanford in biomaterials. Spent a few years at Genentech in a leadership development program, mostly commercial strategy and business development roles. And this is the third health tech device company I've been a part of launching. The second as co-founder. I've been at it for 9 years. So that was the original device that we inherited from Boston University, our collaborator. And this is the current commercial device. So it's been a long 9-year, $30 million journey in terms of R&D. And now we're in the commercial phase, having got de novo clearance. January 12th last year. Wow. And we started shipping devices in May.
Super exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Cody. And very cool that you have one of the first gens behind you. That's awesome. Go Terriers for the contributions to that. That is awesome. Great. So we're going to start off just chatting through the pathways and what really the differences are between these to lay the groundwork for this discussion. So, Susan, if you want to start off maybe explaining the major differences between the 510K de novo and PMA pathway as well, in contrast to that for class 3 devices, that would be helpful to know. And also, why is the 510K considered a clearance process while de novo and PMA are approval processes?
Thank you. So a couple of different issues there. So first of all, in the original medical device law written in 1976, there were just PMAs and 510Ks, and they chose the wording, and that was all negotiated. So approvals and clearances, what kinds of products and classes were also defined. And what happened over time was that technologies were being used in many different ways. So the same technology could be in a lot of different areas, as in a lot of different products. And the original law said if you didn't have a predicate, if you couldn't be a 510K and establish that you were substantially equivalent, the words I'm emphasizing are important, substantially equivalent, then you were automatically a PMA. And that went on from 76 to the mid-90s. What happened over that period of time in the industry is that technologies are being used in a lot of different ways. And a lot of different technologies were being evolved, were being created. And what we identified was that there were many products that didn't have a per se predicate in the market, but had very well understood technology and were safe. The technologies were safe. The use was new. Well, if it's a new use, it can't be a 510K. If it's not in class 2 and it can't be a new use. So we had a lot of products coming in, very simple products coming in that all had to be PMAs. Well, that's not great for the companies, and it wasn't great for the agency either, because PMAs took a lot more time and a lot more effort and a lot more team, and it just didn't seem right. So de novo was created to address that issue, to say, well, it's a new use, so it's a new intended use, so it doesn't have a 510K predicate, but the risk isn't so high, and we well understood technology. Why should it need a PMA? And that was the origin of de novo. And if you read the de novo, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but de novo is based on that. If the technology is well understood and the safety of that technology is understood, then you have an opportunity to become classified. The de novo is a classification process, be classified into class 1 or 2. So if you think about it, we did it for the agency as well as for the industry. Why would the agency spend a lot of time reviewing PMAs for things that didn't need a PMA, where things were well understood? So it benefited the agency and it benefited the industry and clearly benefits patients to have a pathway where new technology with well understood safe technologies could get to the market more quickly, more easily, and as Cody pointed out, also more cost effectively, and and still protect the public health. So that's kind of where it all came from. So the terminology of clearance versus approval is, a selection of words to be clear that there are different processes. As we all know, the 510K, you're comparing to something that's in the market. You identify why you're similar, why you don't have to literally start from scratch in working with FDA and FDA understanding the technology and the work that's done and the safety and efficacy. You have to demonstrate that you are as safe and as effective in 510K, but de novo allows you to take a technology and find new uses and modify technology slightly and get into the market. And so I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Susan. Super helpful context and good to know really it's at the core of this is safety and efficacy and how the FDA is viewing your device in these two respects. So Carmen, would love to hear from you.
One last comment. So that nobody is confused. FDA in the end has to agree, propose, but FDA in the end gets to decide.
Yeah, that'll be really helpful when we talk later about, how we determine these answers from FDA when we go through like the pre-sub processes and other conversations with them and what types of questions to ask. So good that, really it's not up to you, but there are maybe things you can do to convince FDA that you belong in one pathway versus another. So Carmen, how do you decide as a company, whether a technology could be novel enough to warrant a de novo instead of a 510K, especially compared to its predicates?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I do just want to clarify one thing. I mean, the de novo pathway in terms of novel can be looked at in two different ways. So Susan mentioned like the novel use. It can be used as applied of like a novel technology in a use case that's well understood. So for example, we have a diagnostic that there are other devices that are also diagnosing that same condition. For example, like sepsis, there are products out there that help and aid in that diagnosis. But now you're applying an AIML to help you do that. Then that technology has not been seen before and maybe isn't as well understood. So we can kind of look at it in two buckets: the new intended use that FDA has never seen, or a new technology that is being applied in a way that FDA has seen. So that's kind of how we like to think about it. And those are ultimately the core of your substantial equivalence argument, right? If you're looking at a 510K of is the same intended use, do you have the same technological characteristics? If you don't have the same technological characteristics, do those raise new and different questions of safety and efficacy? If that's the case, likely a de novo pathway. But it is up to you as the sponsor to make that argument of why those risks are not life-sustaining that would force you to be a class 3 PMA pathway.
Yeah, super helpful. And thanks, Carmen. I wanted to note too, for those of you listening on LinkedIn, if you guys have any questions as well as you're listening, please put those in the LinkedIn event comments. So our amazing Gabby on our marketing team will get me those on the side. We actually just had one roll in already. So before I move into more of the questions, I want to address this. So someone asked, we are developing 2 class 2 medical devices and want to combine them into a single all-in-one product. How should we approach classification and the FDA approval pathway?
Oh, That's a great question. I mean, I think it depends on kind of what the intended use of the overall product would look like. Are those two intended uses of those different components substantially different? Is there something similar out there for each component? Is there something similar out there for the combined intended use? That's kind of how I would look at it. Because say, for example, that combined intended use, there's a similar product out there that is class 3, but maybe if you separate what product would look like, are those two intended uses of, there's like echoing happening, are those two intended use then maybe class 1 or class 2 on their own, and you have to kind of consider how do you want to market the product, and how do you want to sell it? Do you want to sell it combined? Do you want to sell it separately? And those kind of decisions, I guess, shouldn't necessarily define the regulatory pathway, but they kind of have to be considered together. Ultimately, how do you as a company want to sell the product to the end user? And what are the regulatory implications of that?
Great, Carmen. Susan, you want to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I would just emphasize something Carmen said that I think is really important. It's what claim do you want to make? What do you want to say this product does? And then what is the risk that it presents in doing what you want it to do? And those are the two pieces that you need to think about, be able to explain, and then be asking about when you talk to FDA.
Great. So it sounds like all about the claims and how you want to market those claims. So whoever asked that, thank you for the great question. Hope that was helpful. So, want to move into some of examples from our startups that we have on here. So I'll start with you, Ozzy. So with CardioSense pursuing a 510K, what made this path more appropriate for your technology? How did you guys compare it to the predicate device?
Yes, great question. I think as Carmen was mentioning, it's all about the functionality and capabilities of your device, that the technology that you built, and also what claims and what claims you want to make, and then go look at the FDA database and all the devices that got previously clearance or there are in US market, and figuring out basically based on the claims and the indication for use and the actual use that you have for your devices, are there similar devices that either they're for complete use case, or there are functions within those devices that would map to the same functionalities that you are intending basically your device to be used for. I would say those define a little bit, carve some of your regulatory strategy. In our case, we had a EKG sensor, STG sensor, and PPG sensor. These are, when you look at them individually, of course, there are devices that have been FDA cleared through 510K. However, ours was a combination. Back to the gentleman who asked us, hey, we want to combine different things. Well, for us, this was combined. So we had to basically look, okay, as a combined device, now, are there, basically, is this going to be cleared through a 510K? And yes, we were able to create that, craft that strategy and story for FDA that, yes, we think this can be cleared through the 510Ks because we think there are similar devices. And in our case, this was a chest-worn device. So we had to also find devices that are chest-worn. So it's not about just basically functionality. It's about, well, how these devices are going to be used as well.
Thanks, Ozzy. And so in contrast to this, Cody, as someone who went through the de novo process, assuming you guys didn't have a predicate device that you could compare to, but were there other factors that tipped this decision, especially compared to other pathways you may have considered?
Yeah, so ours was unique in that there's actually two similar PMAs. One was Mellofind, approved in 2011, and the other was Nevisense, approved in, I believe, 2017. Both were indicated for dermatologist use to inform biopsy decisions for melanoma. Our indicated use is to inform referral decisions for melanoma, BCC, and SCC for primary care physicians. So kind of our stance with the FDA was it's less of a diagnostic in the sense that it's not just for one cancer type. And I think more importantly, it's informing a referral. It's not informing a surgical procedure. Yes, biopsies are relatively minor surgical procedures, but still, it's a surgical procedure. Though I think generally the FDA's concern was not, I think they directly expressed over the 1-year review process that being non-specialist, right, they weren't as, by definition, specialized and expert in evaluating suspicious lesions. And so I think, the clinical evidence threshold was quite high. We submitted 6 clinical studies in total, in addition to a few other early evidence studies we did. But yeah, and part of it was, I think, a trend. There's a lot of startups that, some could be an academic group that submit a pre-submission meeting. So I think the FDA has been concerned for years that there could be a lot of these skin lesion analyzers, and they actually convened a panel to talk about that a couple years ago. And part of the recommendations from that panel was actually to keep it PMA, because there hadn't been a lot of experience real world evidence. So the FDA, I think, took most of the advisory panel's recommendations, but not that one, in terms of making us a de novo, but also there's kind of been public discussions how they plan to down classify the 2 PMAs. So I think kind of the referral versus biopsy was helpful, but I think they were kind of moving in that direction. Anyway, and there's a lot of pros and cons on both sides, PMA versus de novo. One board member strongly felt perspective, you should stay class 2 if you can. Compliance costs alone are an extra $500,000 to $1 million a year for PMA, a lot less flexibility on, manufacturing improvements, things like that. But also, you're basically protected from class action lawsuits because the device was approved versus cleared. So, we had kind of pros cons tables and talked through it from the business perspective. I think one board member put it well, which was, I think DermaSensor's preference is whatever the FDA's preference is. Do a label that you think makes sense for the product, for the market, for the company, and just see where FDA nets out on it. And it was actually interesting. I forget the name. I think it's like accepted for substantive review, if I recall. So we submitted the de novo, and they accepted the de novo submission for substantive review. But in the letter saying they accepted it, had the 8,000 pages, had everything that was needed. They said, we have not yet determined whether you're a de novo or PMA. And which apparently is like never happened, or is very rare that happens. So there's a lot of internal discussion and debate, it seemed, among FDA, kind of how to classify these.
Yeah.
Super helpful to know. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a good time to kind of bring up the overall process of how the de novo goes. Because like what Susan mentioned, it was started in the 90s, but it wasn't actually officially codified till like 3 years ago. And so the process was kind of a little unclear, and that kind of, I guess, presented some challenges through the years. And now it kind of somewhat mirrors or is similar to the 510K process, is obviously just significantly longer.
What I would add is that de novo was codified. What happened is it is evolved, and it's evolved with the experience of the teams. So one of the things that evolved is there are many more de novos now, because FDA is slicing and dicing more narrowly, and so there are more de novos now. So that's number one. Number two is that the process has also evolved. They've learned in these couple of decades, what do they need to see? How do they need to see it? What's the most appropriate way to do that? Using the pre-submission program specifically to have those discussions. So the programs evolve over time. I would just say to everybody who's listening, who has not been through these processes with FDA, something Cody mentioned and Carmen mentioned and Ozzy mentioned as well. Much of this information is available on the FDA website. And it's there because there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of different things going on. There's thousands of different kinds of devices. So one of the things that's really incumbent on the company is to look and see what's out there. As you heard Cody say, looking at all the different devices that are out there, the way they've been regulated, the kind of data they've had to bring to put together your proposal for how you want your device to go to market. Whether you clearly fit in 510K, clearly fit in PMA, or somewhere in between and think that de novo is a better fit for you, for the claims you want to make, for the product you want to market. So there's a whole process that goes on, but there's a lot of information on the FDA website. So I'm putting in a plug for the FDA website.
There is. I totally agree. A couple of the stats approaches we used in the deficiency letter, they're like, see this link on like how you're supposed to do repeatability, reproducibility analysis. We're like, oh, whoops. Yeah. So I think there's yeah, some which saves you time, right? You don't have to, ask statisticians what, because sometimes they have their preferences, but who cares? Do what FDA says they want to see. Like, and then you have to replicate the analysis anyway, how they prefer.
Great. Thank you, guys. So yeah, startups, definitely do your research. Check out those FDA websites and the guidance that they provide already for you guys. And thank you all for providing some context, the differences between the timelines, costs, litigation potentially as well. So I think that's super helpful context when startups are thinking about this. Want to go back quickly to the PMA versus de novo question. So Carmen, are there potential market access benefits to taking on a PMA rather than a de novo? Can you box out competitors better with that pathway?
Yes, technically. I mean, the most obvious is that you force your competitors to go class 3 PMA. So you force them through that pathway. The flip side of that is that any future iterations of your device are also then subject to PMA. So that kind of has to be taken into consideration. We've talked a lot about the claims that you want to make and how you want to market the product, but also think about how you may want to change those or reiterate the device in the future. So say you have, one disease indication now, you're looking at melanoma. Do you want to add future indications later? What would that pathway look like? How would that change? Are you okay boxing yourself in to that PMA pathway down the road? But again, ultimately, you don't really get a complete say in it. FDA has to make the final determination, but just kind of thinking that, taking those into consideration when you're making your initial proposal of how you think that first product should be regulated.
Great to know. Yeah. So for those of our startups going down the PMA pathway, at least there may be some silver lining for those higher costs and longer timelines affiliated with that. So, coming back to the 510K pathway, Ozzy, how did going down this pathway ultimately impact your labeling and claims for your product? And alongside this, how can your marketing be affected when you go down this pathway?
Yes. Definitely deciding between if you want to do 510K or de novo, it will affect your marketing, because with marketing of medical devices, especially when they are regulated, you are going to be limited to the claims that your device has been cleared for, right? So that will kind of dictate a lot of marketing materials, and I know a lot of companies kind of like to do more, like to go beyond sometimes what they have been cleared for, and that's why some companies prefer to choose to basically go through the de novo path. So with 510K, as it came multiple times during this discussion, you are going to be limited to a little bit to the what you've been cleared for, what other similar devices has been claiming in their material, because you're kind of mimicking their indication for yours, their claims, versus I would say if you want a more tailored, basically a marketing approach, more tailored claims for your product, of course, if a similar device doesn't exist, de novo could be a better path for you. In our case, we thought the claims we want to go to market with were very well aligned with basically the claims that our predicates also had. So for us, a 510K approach was a very, for this specific product that we cleared, was a good regulatory strategy. We have other devices that we are going to basically take through de novo. We wanted more custom fit, more tailored claims, which we are going to submit to FDA, and hopefully we will get approval for those as well.
Thanks, Ozzy, and great to know that your claims aligned well enough with the predicate where, that wasn't a concern. Want to, end some of the conversation around comparing these pathways with some common misconceptions you guys may have seen or heard from startups regarding the differences between the 510K versus de novo pathways. So Susan, maybe we'll start with you for this, but also love to hear from Carmen and Ozzy.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on one of the other pressures, I guess it would be. And Cody and Ozzy probably will have something to say about this, and that is, what do your investors want? Investors frequently want something unique but fast. So some want it fast and some want it unique, and I'm going to let them answer that, but I wanted to put that on the table as well.
Yeah,
So
maybe we'll jump to that, yeah.
I can chime in. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of discussion how PMAs have higher exits generally, but the counter to that was, well, yeah, but that's just because of typically the nature of the product and the clinical evidence and everything. It's not just a PMA versus de novo means it's like inherently has so much more value for some reason. So for us, the hardware, the indication might have changed slightly, for example, to inform referrals and biopsies rather than just referrals if we were a PMA. But the hardware is the same, the clinical evidence was the same. So in our case, that wasn't really that big of a concern. So I think the leaning was more class 2, just in terms of the speed. I mean, it was still a 1-year clearance process, but better than maybe a year and a half. Who knows what a PMA would have been. But also, yeah, kind of the speed of iterations in terms of manufacturing related stuff, not as stringent claims, compliance considerations, and also, we can now, and we have active ones in development, submit 510Ks on our own product, right? So we could run, currently it's a device that runs one algorithm, the cleared algorithm, but we can show, hey, we have a new updated algorithm that performs better than the prior one, which actually was interesting when we met with the FDA about that. Prior to the meeting, we realized we actually don't have to show it's better. We just have to show it's not inferior. But of course, why would we want to update an algorithm something that's not better? So, the observed performance needs to be higher. But in terms of powering, like, do you really need to show it's superior? Like, what 510K has to show it's superior to the predicate, right? You just have to show comparability. So.
That's great. Misconception I've heard as well is people thinking they have to show superiority when it's really non-inferiority or not, worse than that device. So it's helpful. Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think practically they want to see clear signals it's superior. Otherwise, why risk an algorithm? Like it's just something new or different. So yeah, I think if you're observed AROC in our world, it's kind of accuracy is like 2% higher. Like why would you bother, right? But if it's meaningful, 10% plus, then
yeah, for sure. And I think thinking about the other stakeholders involved in the process too. I mean, clearly when you're showing efficacy, this is benefits for the patient primarily, but there can be other benefits for the other stakeholders, like the surgeon providing, doing the procedure, or the doctor, doing the diagnosis in terms of timing and other benefits that aren't weighed in FDA's decision, but could be beneficial for other stakeholders to increase adoption and give clear benefits versus that predicate device. Awesome. So Ozzy, would love to hear from you on this too. Like,
there are 2 questions, one from Susan and one from you on the basically misconception. So Susan, at least from my own experience of working with board members, yes, they want something. Well, they want everything, right? They want something to be very unique and new. they want a return on their investment, and they want it as fast as possible. So a little bit of it is like expectation management, I would say. For me, first of all, the device should work with my boards. First of all, beyond any of this, your device first should work. And then that you should have a good market strategy, right? So to make sure they're going to get a return of investment. Now, a part of this is not everything for me should go through PMA to be aligned with that. Sometimes a unique market strategy that will give them a return on their investment can be done through 510Ks and can be done through De Novo as well. So it's all about having making sure your regulatory strategy is very well aligned with your business goals and business strategy. And kind of you have an end-to-end story, not just a regulatory strategy that all of a sudden will make the company will make next steps for the company, will make the company feel stuck, and kind of they have to now do something to kind of change their previous regulatory strategy. For me, it's very important for the regulatory team to be very much incorporated part of the life cycle of the program, the product, and also the regulatory team should be aligned with the business strategy. And that's where kind of things line up. At least that has been my own experience. Now, back to the misconceptions versus, Nicole, your question of misconception of De Novo versus 510K. I know a lot of people think De Novos are much harder, much more expensive, more tedious work, and like more expensive, basically, approach. I would say a bad 510K or bad regulatory strategy for a 510K can land you in the same timelines and same money consumption. So for me, companies or startups should make their strategy based on really what their claims are, how do they want to sell this product, later what reimbursement codes, for example, they're going to tap into, what's again that end-to-end goal. And based on that, and based on, okay, what predicate devices are in the market and which are aligned with your claims, kind of should lead that regulatory strategy. Yes, De Novo is going to give you a little bit more advantage, but this concept of no 510Ks is faster, 510Ks doesn't need clinical studies, for me, it's a myth. A lot of 510Ks need clinical studies. If you think your device is neo through the 510K strategy, you want to clear a device that you think it is neo. You want to show to your board members that this gives patient a new advantage, right? And if FDA is going to also see that, and for that new technology, unfortunately, they're going to ask you for clinical studies. So it's you are going to see that there is not much difference between a De Novo and a 510K. They will both require clinical studies. Yes, the De Novo is a little bit higher in a submission fee. Yes, the De Novo is going to be a little bit longer process, but for me, that should not be kind of your marketing and your business strategy should kind of help choose what regulatory strategy you should go with, not the other way around.
Good advice. Thanks, Ozzy. Bounce back to Susan and Carmen quickly. Any other misconceptions you guys want to share when you're working with startups?
Yeah, I think Ozzy mentioned a really great one that I see kind of all the time that kind of ties in that like what your investors want as well. And honestly, I think she had a really great solution that she offered for companies. And that's that 510Ks don't require clinicals. I think that's like the biggest misconception out there, and that majority of them, that's correct. But it really, again, depends on what your claims are, how you can validate those claims. There are things out there that you just cannot validate in a benchtop model or in an animal model, and that will require clinical evidence. We see that a lot with IVDs that specifically require clinical validation. And the solution that she offered of aligning both your regulatory goals and your business goals and giving investors your end-to-end strategy really, I think, is the key there, of showing them exactly why you're doing everything at each step of the way, so that you kind of avoid that question of like, well, why haven't you considered a 510K? Wouldn't we avoid that clinical study that you're proposing down the line if we went that pathway. And you can kind of argue against that preemptively of, well, we've already determined the claims that we're going to make based on how we're going to sell the product. And here's the evidence that we're going to need to show the FDA that that is safe and effective in our intended population.
Yeah, great advice. And you're definitely right. 510K does often need maybe a small human confirmatory study that the FDA suggests for the product we worked on. They definitely suggested that. Susan, yeah, something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to add. No, because I fully agree with what Carmen and Ozzy were saying. But you have to remember, so first of all, it's about 10 to 15% of 510Ks require clinical data in order to get cleared.
Yeah.
There's another group where some clinical evidence, it's not a full clinical trial, it's not defined, but some clinical data helps. So it's not zero. And you're a company going to market. Frequently, even if you're a 510K, if you want to be able to say something about your device, your customer is going to want to see clinical data. So it's not always whether or not you need clinical data. It's when do you develop that data? How do you use that data? And who wants to see that data? So I think you need to think more broadly, not just, oh, clinical or no clinical. It's when, what, how, and what do you want to be able to say, particularly when you first enter the market. Because you're going into a market, you're going to compete in the market, whether you're a de novo, a 510K, or a PMA. What do you want to say?
Yeah, great point, Susan. So even if you don't require it for your 510K specifically, if the FDA isn't requiring it, down the line for adoption by the providers that are going to be using this, you know, they're going to want to see human clinical data at conferences and white papers. Payers are going to want to see this to cover your product. The hospital VAC will want to see this as well before they bring your product in and take the risk on it. So definitely, it's as we've heard, you know, this regulatory approval is really not the end of the tunnel. And so think of framing, you know, maybe how you could craft a clinical study that is both used for regulatory clearance approval and then also for adoption down the road.
Yeah, and that I guess also might factor in kind of how regulatory and reimbursement are often combined, because that's something that you may need to consider as well. Of again, kind of FDA doesn't require it, maybe adoption might not, but in order to get reimbursed, that clinical evidence may come in.
Which gives me the opportunity to say two things that I want to make sure that in addition to we're talking about PMA, de novo, and 510K, there are other processes like breakthrough and step and tap, which are available to 510K companies as well as de novo companies, as well as PMA companies. And those are programs which allow FDA to accelerate the first two, breakthrough and tap and step, allow FDA, if you meet the requirements of the program, to work with you more interactively and move your product faster, even if it's a 510K. So you can be substantially equivalent under the law and still need expedited review because you provide something that the current product doesn't, that's advantageous to the population. So there are a number of things that you do need to consider. And then TAP is a very different program. We're not going to talk in detail about TAP. I just want companies to know that you need to look at all of the ways that FDA is working with industry to bring your products to market as you make these decisions.
Thanks for advertising our webinar for next week, Susan, which is tapping into resources, accelerating through the breakthrough device pathway. So right on, we'll be talking more about that next week. We've got two of our alumni that have been through the TAP program, as well as Scott Shore, who helped initiate it as well. So will be great to hear from them. So definitely keep that in mind. We had a question roll in from LinkedIn, which is, can you explain the clinical trial requirement differences potentially for de novo versus PMA in terms of number of patients, number of studies, clinical endpoints, safety endpoints, other maybe differences between those pathways and what's required?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think that kind of dives into the last question actually really well of the common misconceptions and that requirement is driven by the pathway, specifically difference between de novo and PMA. So your endpoint, number of patients, study size, kind of overall number of studies is really driven by your device and the claims that you want to make and not by the pathway. I will say generally, overall, you're going to see a PMA require more clinical studies, much larger clinical studies. But again, that's driven by endpoints that are proving a longer outcome studies, higher risk, life sustaining, like in biopsy, or where the risk of failure is much higher than in de novo. So generally, the study size is smaller. But again, that really goes back to what are you trying to say your device does and how does it do it? I think that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Thanks, Carmen. Hopefully that was helpful to whoever asked that. Want to talk a bit more about like some strategy considerations. And Carmen, you talked earlier, about like novel technology and how this could warrant a de novo. And so Cody, would like to hear from you, like, did de novo status provide DermaSensor with a competitive moat? And how has your usage of AI specifically helped to distinguish your technology from your competitors?
Sorry, the second half was how the use of AI?
Yep.
Yeah.
Helped distinguish
So the competitive moat, well, we're the only one product of our kind, so competitive moat is a little odd. And that, yeah, I mean, we're the only available tool of any kind that provides a risk result to non-dermatologists for skin cancer. So our kind of competitors are basically dermatoscopes, which are just imaging tools that, PCPs have to or any physician has to train tens or hundreds of hours on how to use. I'd say that the downsides of a de novo, I think there's the false impression, this has been covered a fair amount by other panelists, the false impression that, oh, it's a de novo, now others can easily follow it with a 510K. First of all, no one can use our same technology because we have 4 issued patent families. So, and even if they could, it's still a new algorithm. They'd probably have to still do major prospective studies like we did, which cost many millions of dollars. And a good example of that is IDX with the follow-on, I think INUC and also AUIE for automated fundus imaging and ophthalmology referral. So the first one, IDX, was a de novo. The second 2 are 510Ks, but they had to do major, huge studies, right? And so that's been covered, I think, by a couple others. That doesn't, just because you're a 510K doesn't mean like you don't have to do long, expensive studies. So, but I think there's like the impression among some, kind of startups in the space that aren't very sophisticated. It's like an academic or a solo founder just starting off like, oh, a 510K, those people say those are easy. This should be easy. That's not true. So in a way, a de novo is kind of inadvertently maybe given a false sense of enabling competitors, oddly. I'd say the other thing, physician perception, we do sometimes get, oh, it's cleared, it's not approved. So is it going to get like approved later and then like really be available? Or is it like really safe and effective since it's only cleared? And the 2 other devices I mentioned that were for derm use to inform biopsies that are PMAs, not like really directly competitors, so it doesn't matter that much. But they have touted like because one of them shut down a while ago, but the one's still available and has negligible use. But still, it's like we're the only FDA approved device for analyzing skin lesions. It's like, okay, well, we're the only FDA cleared device, right? Whatever. But so I think they're approved. There is that. There's the perception, I think, among the industry and physicians, I think, kind of have a high level awareness that there is a difference.
Okay, great. Yeah, and thanks, Cody. Coming back to, the 510K pathway, Susan, would love to hear from you if there are ways to strategically frame your indications for use on claims to make it fit down this pathway, or is that a risky thing to try to push down if it isn't a clear fit for another predicate?
So I would just say that the risk is what your company wants to say. And I'm sure that Carmen will have some things to say about that as well. I think that the real issue is, what do you, as you've heard multiple times, what do you want to say? What do you need to say about your device in order to have it adopted and used? That really is the first driver. What's your technology, but what do you want to say it provides? That's critically important. Once you decide that, you can do, remember, you can do a de novo first for a specific claim, or a 510K first and then do a de novo for an advanced claim. You're not restricted. You're not restricted. Depends on the claim structure that you want to have. So it's, what do you want to be able to say? How do you want to be able to say it? Can determine whether you de novo first and then 510K to your de novo. Remember that once you're in class 1 or class 2, there's even a shorter pathway when you change your own device. So there's some real opportunities for you as a company to think about those things. The second thing I wanted to say, which I sort of offline but meets here, is, and you heard it, but we haven't specifically said it, FDA down classifies things from 3 to 2. FDA has the authority to say, it's been a PMA, we have enough understanding, we have enough data, we have enough knowledge about how these products can remain safe. They can be down classified into class 2, and everybody else does a 510K. So there are multiple levels here that a company needs to think about in terms of, what claim do you want to make? What do you need to claim first? Can you do a simpler claim first and then do a more advanced claim? Would that be maybe 510K versus de novo? There's a lot of opportunities here.
Yeah, I guess that's a great point, Susan. Just to give kind of companies an example of that down classification, we saw that with continuous glucose monitors over the years, and I know there are other examples, but also kind of reducing your claims to kind of fit that class 2 pathway. I think the most common example that I see is in the diagnostic space of, are you an aid to diagnosis, or are you a traditional diagnosis? And that's where you kind of have to paint the picture of not only what do you want to be able to say about the device, but how does it fit into the clinical workflow? So are you providing physicians with the information to ultimately make the decision in the grand scheme of all of the other information that they would use to make the next decision? Or are you the one that informs them, I think you should order a biopsy, end of discussion? Or are you kind of just one piece in the puzzle that they're looking at? And that's something to kind of consider in how you write your intended use.
Well, thank you both so much. I want to spend the last few minutes we have here talking about interacting with the FDA. So you guys have talked already about how important FDA is in making this final call, both in terms of the pathway and the testing requirements toward this pathway. So I'm curious, maybe Ozzy, we can hear from you first. What's the right timing to engage with the FDA to determine which pathway you should follow, and what type of data should you present in your pre-sub meeting to propose which pathway you feel is best?
Yeah, I would say really my advice to the startups is engage as early as you have a functioning prototype, right? You don't want to put a kind of sci-fi project in front of FDA, but as soon as you know that you have some ideas and some types, basically your product shows feasibility, start conversations with FDA. But please do it before you finalize your design. That's a recipe for disaster, right? Things are going to come up in the meetings and you will be forced to change the design, and it's not, your VCs or kind of cost-wise, you're not going to be liking it. I would say early engagement with FDA, basically as soon as you can. Communicate with FDA. A lot of FDA personnel also, I know there's this misconception that kind of FDA is a barrier, but also a lot of the reviewer there also want to help. Basically, kind of you guys have a to go through the submission, right? But you have to provide them data. They are not working within your company. You can't expect them to just look at a few material and know in and out of the product. These Q-subs, these pre-subs with FDA is the chance for you to also go talk with your reviewers and really kind of educate them a little bit with what's coming and kind of what your product is about and all the different elements about the product, all the difference, for example, how you are going to test the product, how you are going to, what are your thoughts on, hey, whether you should have clinical data to submit or not. You can discuss this with FDA and kind of your regulatory strategy. You can, even like the regulatory path, you can have a very open discussion with FDA. I would say don't go to FDA and use them as consultants. They're not your consultants. They're not going to give you a regulatory strategy. Please do your homework. Have proposals with FDA, have real questions with FDA, and then give FDA enough data through your Q-subs to read, get a little bit kind of give them visibility to some of your material, and then ask them questions that you can really incorporate it into the design. It's not a mandatory step of the project. Don't think that, oh my God, for my 510K, I need to have a pre-sub, otherwise I won't get approval. This is really a chance for you to make basically make good decisions for your product. But bring FDA along with you, have good questions about the type of clinical testing that you should do, what type of testing is required, is my indication for use sufficient, is my regulatory path sufficient for this type of product, and any other basically questions that you think it's a real internal questions for your company.
Yeah, thanks, Ozzy. Helpful. Carmen, love to hear from you on this one too, like timing wise, what do you think?
I guess first I did want to kind of just emphasize some things that Ozzy said, because I think she made some great points. There are multiple types of ways to interact with FDA depending on the stage of company that you are. So people often hear about pre-submissions. Pre-submissions are a part of the Q submission program, and there's actually multiple different types of interactions under that umbrella. One of them in particular I want to highlight is an informational meeting. So that could be advantageous for a company that's developing, say, a really complex product, or they're using something in a really novel way, or you have a PMA class 3 type product and you have a really long regulatory road and you just want to sit down and educate the FDA on your product and how you intend to use it. So it differs from a pre-sub in the sense that you can't ask specific questions up front and you don't get written feedback that's binding. But it is a chance to have a conversation with FDA about kind of high-level concerns that they would think about. Maybe there's something about the clinical workflow that you're not describing or that you haven't thought of. And so that could be a good opportunity. So it's not just interact with the FDA, do a pre-sub, and that's your only option. Really think about how you want to approach them as in addition to when to approach them. But I think the really great point she also made was your homework, give them proposals and give them enough information to make an informed decision. The FDA is composed of people. At the end of the day, they're humans, and they can't read your mind, and they're not in your QMS, and they can't see the documents that you don't give them. So if you don't give them the information to come to the same conclusions that you want them to, they're going to give you a different answer. Or they're going to ask questions and say they don't have enough information to make that determination. And so the onus is on you as a sponsor and as a company to give them, walk them to the conclusions you want them to make.
Quick comment to what Carmen said. You can have more than one pre-sub.
Yeah, that's a great point too. It doesn't have to be a one and done.
Yes, awesome. And so, Susan, I know you're gonna have to move rooms soon. So one last question, from you is, you've been that human on the other side at FTA. Who do you like, what did you like to see, at Q-Sub meetings? So who should the startups invite to these, and who should be involved in the process? So someone on LinkedIn also asked, should you always have a regulatory, expert, consultants, involved in this process and at the meetings? Or is this something you can do internally?
I would say you want the key people, you want the key people, again, not the C-suite, but the key people who know the product and who can answer questions about the area that you are talking about, well briefed, well prepared. When I was in companies, I never took the CEO. It's the idea for small companies, sometimes the CEO is the inventor, is the person who needs to be at the table. But it's got to be the people who are important and knowledgeable of the company who can not just ask questions, but can answer them. So carefully selected. No, you don't need a lawyer. You don't need those people at all your meetings unless the topic is something of that sort. That's not these are working meetings. You want someone with the knowledge and the capability to have the right discussion. So select who goes to the meetings carefully. And again, not necessarily the C-suite and not necessarily your legal counsel, unless your topic is that. That's my advice, and I say that publicly, including to FDA.
Great advice. Thanks,
FDA would
Susan.
probably agree with you.
Yes.
I agree also. Maybe I can.
Yes.
So I would say, depending on your topic, right? Yes, you can have multiple pre-subs with FDA. So depending on what topic is that you are discussing with FDA, I would say make sure a regulatory person who basically is going to present your regulatory strategy to the FDA is in the room, and the subject matter expertise related to that topic. If it's a clinical, make sure there's a clinical person in the room. Now, if it's about statistics, make sure there's a statistician in the room. If depending on what topic you want to discuss with FDA, make sure, and this could be your regulatory person too, right? Depending on who is the right person in the company to represent those information to the FDA and answer FDA's, because we can't predict what FDA is going to ask, right? If FDA asks basically random questions about the product to learn more about the product, one person should be ready to have the answers, and you want that person with you in the room.
Awesome. And Cody, for you, was there a pivotal FDA interaction or meeting you guys have that changed your course, and who did you guys invite to your meetings?
Yeah, I mean, I think an important thing for us was just having top-notch and consistent regulatory counsel. We had, I can't even remember, either 4 or 5 pre-submission meetings over the course of the few years while we were developing the device. I don't want to just, oh, actually, never mind. I can disclose it because it's public. It's on our approval documents. So yeah, Janice Hogan at Hogan Levels was kind of regulatory counsel. I would recommend for startups, because she's a very senior partner, one of the top medical device lawyers in the country. So I would recommend in terms of actually like doing the heavy lifting for pre-subs and the submission, don't use $1,000 an hour lawyers. I recommend consultants and in-house. Me and our now medical director ended up doing a way more clinical study reports, CSR stuff than we expected. The 100-hour, we actually got shingles during it, which was fun. But yeah, I think kind of having and paying for the really seasoned legal counsel makes sense for the FDA related interactions and strategy and reviewing your pre-sub and reviewing submission documents, things like that, but don't have them do it. So I think that's just kind of high level. Yeah, there wasn't really one. Oh, sorry. The one other high level advice I've given this on a couple other panels too was be ready for any last minute labeling changes you may want. We did not do that. That was actually an area of frustration with kind of the regulatory folks around me. we had no idea that literally in the last like 2 hours, there would be a door open for, oh, and what about these wording and that wording and like, what makes sense? I'm like, and so, we could have easily had a meeting a couple weeks before with like a reimbursement expert, some of our medical advisors, our lawyer, like, okay, with these 10 main aspects of our labeling, what are our preferred options if the door opens for any of them? And kind of had been ready to go on that. Instead, I just had to make a decision. Like I called the department chair of dermatology at Yale. He didn't pick up. I called someone else. They picked up, talked to him for 5 minutes, like very ad hoc, and just like made a decision on what to do for a couple major parts of our labeling. So don't do what I did. Have the meeting at least a couple weeks. 'Cause, once they move into labeling, discuss, your lawyer or whoever's involved will tell you when you're about to get cleared, right? Kind of the discussion starts shifting to kind of preparing for what's the decision summary and stuff like that. And when that starts happening, you're going to get cleared in coming weeks, then start preparing those kind of plan A, plan B, plan C.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is kind of the indication that your submission is going to be successful. It's not always the case. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, those like frequent fast interactions at the end of those submissions, and that's, agnostic of the pathway.
Yeah, because they want to hit their deadline. We were coming up, so January 12th, or just after the holidays. I think it was like 10 days before. January 12th was a Friday, because I remember the division director said, change your flight. I was at JP Morgan. I was like, I'm supposed to fly out tomorrow. She said, I would change that flight. Because there was tons of back and forth. And we also had a required post-market surveillance study as one of our special controls. So we're also, and that's another thing. I asked if that, I think when you can appropriately, and you end up getting to know the lead review folks, ask if you can review draft language. I'm not sure what's appropriate to share from our process, but there's certain things that you may be able to weigh in on prior to them being approved by senior FDA leadership and being made public. So I think where possible, ask if it's okay to review the drafts before things are finalized. But yeah, 10 days before clearance, I remember it was about a week and a half, and it was clear there were still a lot of steps that had to happen. So like, okay, are you guys thinking kind of end of January, hopefully for a final? They're like, no, we're trying to get it done by next Friday to meet our deadline. And we're like, okay. So we knew it was going to be kind of a fast and furious next week and a half, and it was, especially the last 24 hours. Yeah.
Great example and stories. Thanks, Cody. Last, I guess, question here before we end the public portion. We've been talking a lot about pre-sub meetings. We know from Cody and Ozzy in particular, there's a lot of documentation that you'll want to prepare in advance to present because, as Carmen said, they're not going to see your QMS and I don't know if there's Carmen or Ozzy and everything in it. So you need to basically share with them some of this proof. So what are some maybe overlooked elements of preparing a Q-sub, particularly maybe a pre-sub meeting package that could make or break your success? So maybe Carmen, we'll hear from you first and then Ozzy.
Yeah, I think people are also like kind of always really hesitant to share details about the device and kind of get really caught up in we just want to give a high level description. And they gloss over, elements of, kind of how things function, how long is the battery life? Are they charging it while they're using it? Other examples of things, how is it going to be distributed? How do you imagine it getting to, kind of along that lines, how do you imagine it getting to the clinician? How do you imagine them using it? There's just kind of this common push of hesitant to share too much information and too much detail with FDA. And I think that gets difficult because FDA just doesn't have information of how it's used or what your device even does. And so that I think is my biggest point of advice is don't be afraid to give them too much detail.
Great advice. Don't be afraid to give too much detail. Ozzy, what about you?
Sure. Basically, the team should consider that you only have 1 hour with FDA, right? And if you share too little, you're going to waste the company's time. That the feedback from FDA is like, hey, basically we can't give you an answer. All that happened here is we just wasted a few months of the company. And now, considering that you have only 1 hour, you don't want to send them your entire document and like pages and pages on topic. This is not an FDA review time. This is an FDA discussion time. So I would say that depending on the topic of the discussion with FDA, you should see first what's the most important and critical topics that you can wrap up within 1 hour. Right, so don't go with too many topics that you can't close the meeting. So you want conclusions in that, and you want a productive meeting. So I would say, please find the balance of how much is enough, like what's a good balance to share with FDA, and within that topic, based on your questions, yes, provide details, high level, summarized details for FDA, so that they can. You can have a productive conversation with FDA.
Great advice. So yeah, and don't present them with brand new data during that short 1 hour meeting. Make sure they have it well in advance so that they have time to review it, and you can frame your questions for that discussion appropriately around it. So with that, we'll conclude our public portion of the webinar today. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us on LinkedIn. Be sure to join us next week for our webinar, which Susan actually alluded to is a very important topic. So tapping into resources, accelerating through the breakthrough device pathway. Again, we'll be talking about the TAP program. And so both of these pathways can be eligible for that if your device is going through it. So be sure to tune into that to hear from two of our great alumni, as well as Scott Shorer, all about that pathway, and especially if you're a startup with an innovative technology, how you can take advantage of FDA resources through that to accelerate your path to market. Awesome. So thank you so much, Ozzy, Carmen, Susan, and Cody again.